Good morning and welcome to this webinar from wherever you are. My name is Beth Njeri, the Digital Content Officer at World Animal Protection. Today we train our focus on factory farming and the rise of superbugs. Leading us in this discussion is Dr. Victor Yamo. He's the Farming Campaigns Manager at World Animal Protection. He's actively engaging the livestock industry, governments, corporates, consumers, and the general public in showing the critical connection between the welfare of farm animals, their productivity, and the quality and safety of the food they produce. Victor is a University of Nairobi trained veterinary surgeon who also holds a Master of Business Administration degree from University of Free State, South Africa. He has extensive experience in veterinary services, poultry production systems, and agribusiness obtained from working within the regional, commercial, and NGO sector. He has worked with companies such as Kenchik, Equity Bank, Coopers, and World Vision International over the last 25 years. Let's take this conversation global as per our last slide with the hashtag #AnimalsMatterAF. Our Twitter handle, as you've also seen in the previous slide, is at MoveTheWorldAF. Just before we kick off, we'll pop up some poll questions just to gauge your understanding on farming systems. This will be up for 1 minute on your screen, so kindly ensure to select your answers quickly. The results will be shared at the end of the webinar, so kindly consider sticking around to the end. After the main presentation by Dr. Victor, we'll have a Q&A session. So if you have any burning questions, kindly type in the Q&A box that's below your screen, and we'll endeavor to channel them to Victor to get answered. Shortly after the main session of the webinar, we'll have a 15-minute journalist session. So if you're a journalist and you're representing any media house, kindly consider sticking around so that you have your questions answered for your stories later after this webinar. It is our hope that you will enjoy this webinar and find it very informative and useful in your communities. So over now to the poll. Thank you to all of you who are participating. Please continue to answer the poll questions. We have about 15 seconds left. Over to you, Victor, to take us through the main presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. Good morning, viewers, participants, wherever you are. I just want to take this opportunity to welcome you to this webinar. And I'll be taking you through a presentation around factory farming and the rise of superbugs. Essentially, what I want us to then look at is maybe to start us off, just to say that this is the most important slide that you're going to see today, because it has my contact. If you have any questions beyond today's engagement, you can actually send us an email, and we'll be able to engage and respond to any other questions or comments that you might have. To start us off, just a brief about World Animal Protection. Our vision is a world where animals live free from cruelty and suffering. World Animal Protection has offices in 15 or 14 countries, and they've been shown there clearly where we are. What we do as part of our mandate is we end the needless suffering of animals. We influence decision makers to put animals on the global agenda, hence the reason why today we are having these discussions. We also move the world. We also help the world to see how important animals are to all of us, and we inspire people to change animals' lives for the better. And as I said, our mission is we move the world to protect animals. We have 4 campaign areas, briefly: animals in communities, that looks at dogs, responsible pet ownership, ending in human culling. We have animals in disasters that look at disaster management. We have animals in the wild that looks at oceans and wildlife trade and matters relating to wildlife and welfare of wild animals. And then last but not least, we have animals in farming, which is essentially what we are looking at today, and we are going to be driving the discussion around. And animals in farming, which is what I do, we have 2 programs. We have Change for Chickens, which is looking at the welfare aspects around intensively farmed chickens. And we have Raise Pigs Right, which is looking at aspects of welfare around pig production systems. Realize those are the 2 big animals in terms of intensive farming systems across the globe. Now, that was just a brief about wild animal protection. I want us to quickly then look at food systems and factory farming, and then pick up the conversation as we go along. What is a food system, or what is food systems? Food systems are essentially a system that encompasses the entire range of actors and their interlinked value-adding activities, e.g. production, aggregation, processing, distribution, consumption, and finally disposal of food products that originate from agriculture, from forestry, fisheries. Essentially, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at anything that is around food production and the process of getting the food from the farm to your table and ultimately for your consumption. Factory farming being characterized by its lack of sentience and the welfare of animals are not acknowledged. Significant negative animal welfare, environmental, and impact labor codes impacts are not addressed and characterized by high volumes and strong cost forecasts. I think just to pick up from there, the main reason why we look at food systems is the fact that there is a population. And there's an African and global population, and as you can see from the slides, we are about 7.3 billion people in the world globally. So 2015 global human population census, and it is estimated that by 2050 we'll have moved to 9.7 billion. I think the important thing for Africa to look at is currently we're about 1.2 billion people. And in the next 35 years, we'll have doubled to 2.4 billion. So the question we need to address, and part of why we look at food system as an organization, is how are you going to feed those 2.4 billion Africans or 9.7 billion persons on the planet? If you're just given a highlight that in 2015, we consumed about 280 billion kilos of meat, 223 billion liters of milk, and about 1 trillion eggs. And realize that we are working in a global context where we have urbanization, the space is diminishing, and we then have to ensure that we cater for animals and ensure that our production is sustainable. In terms of just going into farming systems, chicken is the world's most favorite meat. We produce about 60 billion chickens annually. But I want to say that it is not the most consumed animal. The most consumed animal in terms of volumes is pigs. That constitutes, we have about 1.5 billion pigs that are consumed annually. Just to put it into context, in around 2,000 meat chickens are slaughtered per second. And in 2013, the global chicken production was about 96.3 million tons, a big chunk of it coming from United States, China, and Brazil. When you come to factory farming, as we have alluded to in the earlier discussion, is destructive and reliant on appalling animal suffering with worker hardships and misuse of planet resources. It has unacceptable practices that include things like close confinement, where the animals are kept very closely. We also have barren environments where the animals are kept in big houses that have nothing that engages their intellect. And we have animals going through routine mutilations, and we also have fast growth rates. And I know people have complained about how chickens grow very fast. By the time we are consuming them, they are barely 5 weeks, at the most 6 weeks. The most important thing to understand in factory farming is to support that system and to ensure that the system works. We then have to prop it up. And one of the things that is being used to prop the system is the use of antibiotics for growth, promotion, and disease control. An interesting thing that has come through is that a report that was recently done by the UN agencies in collaboration with ILRI and just around COVID response in looking at pandemics shows that since 1940, half of the zoonotic infections that have moved between animals and humans are actually coming from intensive farming systems. Things like swine flu, bird flu, Nipah virus are well documented, and we are currently dealing with the COVID-19 situation, which, as we all are aware, came from a wet market somewhere in Wuhan, China. That is part of the story, but the main thing that we need to be looking at, and the gist of the presentation today, is to also say that farming system is laying a foundation for another devastating health crisis that is apparently almost on us, and that is matters relating to antimicrobial resistance. And in relation to that, I would then want to look at antibiotic overuse within farming systems and what we are seeing as we go along. Antibiotics is being used in factory farming systems to prevent stressed animals and confined animals from falling sick. Realize that if animals are kept in the situation where we are in the photo that is on the slide, the chances of them getting sick is very high. And so part of it is just to pump antibiotics into the system so that you prevent, as a preventive measure, so that the animals are not getting sick. Ample scientific data is also available that shows that antibiotic overuse in farms is leading to antibiotic-resistant organisms, what we commonly call superbugs. What is that looking like? About 131,000 tons of antibiotics are used in farming, and that actually constitutes 75% of total global antibiotic production. So you can imagine 75% of what is produced globally as antibiotics ends up in your farming system. A recent study looking at how much costs when you put a kilogram of fluoroquinolone, one of the antibiotics, in meat chickens. The ultimate cost in terms of health and economic cost on people is about $1,500 US. So you can just see the economic losses we are losing because of antibiotic overuse in the production system. 90 countries have prohibited the use of antibiotics to promote growth in farm animals, but only 6 prohibit the use of antibiotics to prevent diseases. So again, you can see the world has started moving towards preventing use of antibiotics in the farming systems, but they're not, especially for growth promotion, but very few countries have started prohibiting the use of antibiotics to prevent disease. 10 out of 78 countries surveyed by FAO have shown that they have regulations limiting antibiotic residues being discharged into the environment. And part of the challenge we have with antibiotic use on farming system is that the waste that comes from that farming system has antibiotic residues, and most of it is being discharged into the environment. And that is something that then contaminates the environment, contaminates the waterways, and ultimately also ends up in contaminating even the agricultural plants that we are growing in the environment. Hence, the critical requirement that handling antibiotics should be a One Health approach, or you bringing together players from the animal health sector, from the medical sector and from the environmental sector, so that we work in a concerted fashion to ensure that antibiotic use is regulated and managed and doesn't have adverse effects in the production system, in human health, and in the environment. As World Animal Protection, about a year back in 2018, we looked at superbugs, and basically what we did was to go to supermarkets, buy pork products, what you're calling pork from the supermarkets, and then from the porks try to isolate any organisms, and then with the organisms that were isolated, take them through an antibiotic sensitivity profile, so that we determine whether they were sensitive or resistant to certain known antibiotics. That process was done in Brazil, Spain, Thailand, and the United States. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see that 14 out of 16 of the samples picked from Walmart, which is a big supermarket in the US, were positive to antibiotic-resistant bacteria. But I think the more important one is the second snap there, which is talking about 9 out of 16 batches contained at least one multi-drug resistant bacteria resistant to 3 or more antibiotics. So essentially what we are saying is that out there in the world, at the supermarket level, at the retail level, we are getting products that already contain superbugs. And those superbugs are not only resistant to one antibiotic, but they are resistant to several. I know the question that then comes out, because I'm talking to an African audience, what about Africa? As you continue following this process, we will be releasing results of a similar study done in Kenya that looked at the 5 big supermarkets. And in this case, we also looked at chicken and pig products, and very interesting findings. Within early next month, we'll be releasing results of the same. Antibiotic use as also research, and in fact, the piece of work I'm talking about has also shown that E. coli, which is one of the bacteria that is normally found in the gut, has been found to be resistant. At least 40% of them were found to be resistant to antibiotics commonly used in farms. And again, as I said, a similar study is ongoing, working with institutions in Kenya, where we are trying to look at, is it the same bacteria? Is it any different? Are we having contamination or superbugs coming through in our system? And those again will be released early next month. 24% of antibiotic-resistant bacteria can be reduced. And in fact, it was shown in a study that you can reduce it by restricting antibiotic use in food animals. So there's also work that shows that if you restrict antibiotic use in food animals, you actually reduce the amount of antibiotic-resistant bacteria that you then come into the food system, which then has minimal, then helps you to reduce contamination to human populations. Having said that, and having just given you a snapshot around antibiotic use and what is happening in the farming systems, it's also good to then understand what animal welfare is, because we are trying to connect animal welfare to production systems and to food systems, and then how then does animal welfare interact and play within the animal production system. Animal welfare, according to the OIE, which is the World Organization for Animal Health, is defined as the defined as the physical and mental state of an animal in relation to the conditions in which the animal lives and ultimately dies. It means that an animal is in good state of welfare if it is healthy, comfortable, well-nourished, safe and able to express innate behavior, and is not suffering from unpleasant states such as pain, fear, and distress. Animal welfare, especially in the farm animal systems, is underpinned by the 5 animal freedoms, which were developed by the Farm Animal Welfare Council of the UK in the early 90s. And there are 5 freedoms, basically are freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, and disease, freedom to express normal behavior, and freedom from fear and distress. This is what constitutes wellness in terms of animals. And I think it is important and critical to understand that in animal welfare systems, we do not talk about animal rights, but we talk about animal freedoms. Just to then highlight some of the things that we are then looking at, freedom from hunger and thirst is very important, because what you feed an animal ultimately ends up becoming part of the food that you consume. If you feed an animal on poor quality maize, for instance, like currently often happens where maize has gone off, you hear that since it's unfit for human consumption, we should then use it for feed production. If you feed an animal with maize that is contaminated with mycotoxins, which is why we then condemn it from human, the animal then just concentrates that mycotoxin and puts it back to you. If you're looking at antibiotics in this case, if an animal has been treated, it means it has been exposed and has consumed antibiotics, either as a growth promoter or as a process of preventing disease. Ultimately, what happens is that antibiotic is then, or the antibiotic is then concentrated and released by the animal, and you will find it in milk, you'll find it in meat, you'll find it in egg, which the human consumer then consumes. I think that is one thing that is important and we need to be looking at. So when we are having a system that is pure and is not catering for the welfare of the animal, we are ultimately ending up with poor quality products which are contaminated on our plates. Freedom from discomfort looks at the space or the house or the environment where the animal is. If the animal is in a poor environment, and as you move around and look at the farms that we have in the African context, you find that the farm has too many animals, so it's congested. Those animals are going to be prone to disease, which then ultimately requires that the animals either be treated. And I think what has happened in the African context from my experience working in industry is that farmers have learned that if you give antibiotics at low doses, you are able to prevent the animals from getting sick. But what farmers fail to appreciate is that the low-dose antibiotic ends up in the food, in the product, which then ends up on the consumer table, and that drives the superbugs situation you're looking at. So one of the things you're looking at very important is ensuring that animals have enough space. The environment that they're living in is clean and hygienic, and is not predisposing the animals to disease, ensuring that we have the right number in that space, and ensuring the space is well ventilated and has no contaminants that could cause problems. Freedom from pain, injury, or disease is about ensuring that the animal disease processes are managed. And one of the things that we need to be looking at in the farming system is how do we vaccinate and ensure that the biosecurity within the farm is at a high level, which then minimizes contamination that then needs to be treated. That means that the house must be cleaned properly. And I think that's part of the challenge where farmers are keeping more than one flock in a house, which then means that the younger flock is always getting contaminated and again leads to antibiotic use to mitigate against that. It is important to understand, and that's why to understand that animals are sentient beings, and that's why it's critical for them to have the ability to express their normal behavior and not have any conditions that cause fear and distress. In terms of normal behavior, we see that in production systems, big farming systems, we have barren environments where the animal is in a big house with maybe litter and there's nothing to play with. And that's why we are talking about animals being provided with an enriched environment where you have things like patches where the chicken can patch. You have enough straws in the house where the pig can root. That way the animal then has muscle activity, which then minimizes chances of disease and ensures that the animal is living a comfortable life, which then also minimizes stress, which then means the animal is not going to have disease conditions that require treatment. So in a nutshell, that's what we're looking at in terms of animal welfare. And as we go forth, we'll be looking at how then do we manage our production system to ensure that the product, the animal is comfortable, is in a good state. And that's what high welfare production system is all about, driving and ensuring. Having said that, what are we then as World Animal Protection recommending for the various sectors? In terms of the food system, the people who are producing food or transporting food or driving that process, we are saying that we need to develop an overarching animal welfare policy that is driven around the 5 domains or the 5 freedoms that I've just discussed, that also drives the procurement. We also need to develop policies that drive minimum responsible standards within the industry. There are standards that are out there, and there are things that we need to be looking at, but the critical thing, especially in most of the African countries, is developing animal welfare policies that then drive the production system and ensures that the production system is at a certain level. The whole production system should also be able to commit itself to using antibiotics responsibly. And I think one of the things that we need to be talking about is that it's not about stopping antibiotic use. It's about using the antibiotics where they're required. If an animal falls sick, the requirement of the law is that the animal should be treated. The requirement of the welfare is that the animal should be treated so that it's not undergoing painful disease conditions that are detrimental to its welfare. We're also saying that we need to start looking at increasing the proportion of plant-based proteins that are available to consumers. Realize that at the rate we are going, we might not have adequate space to grow the number of animals that we require, but we still need the population to be healthy. And that then requires that we need to start having a proportion where we are looking at plant-based proteins as part of the process. Remember that even to grow animals, to produce milk at certain levels, or to produce chickens at certain level, you need plant-based proteins. Chickens have to consume soya. The cows must consume some protein based to drive that process. So maybe it's something for us to start looking at and saying, let's produce proteins that we can consume instead of driving that process through animals. Finally, it's to ask the industry across, whether it's a retailer, a fast food restaurant, and I know some of them have started from where the source markets they come from, to publish their annual reports showing progress towards implementing higher welfare commitments. In the subsequent webinars, in this webinar series, we'll be looking at what consumers are saying. And consumers are beginning to get alert and beginning to realize that it's important to understand where the food that they eat is coming from. Hence, it is important that industry starts to report progress annually, just like they report the annual financial returns of how they are managing animal welfare and how they're catering for the welfare of animals, so that we minimize not only suffering of animals, but also ensure that ultimately we are able to assess who is doing the right thing, whether it's a supermarket or a restaurant or a producer, and those are the people then we should be looking at supporting, because they are part and parcel of ensuring that the delivery of protein to human population is sustainable and humane. Finally, for governments, we are saying introduce and enforce regulations in line with the minimum requirements of animal welfare. We're also saying that introduce and enforce regulations around the routine use of antibiotics. In countries, and several of the African countries have developed national policies and action plans around the reduction of antibiotic use or antibiotic resistance. The challenge has been that those plans are available, but they are not being implemented. And I think that's one of the things that we are requesting government, working with key stakeholders to ensure that routine antibiotic use is then regulations around it is enforced, so that we do not get antibiotics readily available. If we look, for instance, in a country like Kenya, where we are in, and the neighboring countries, Uganda and Tanzania, it's very easy for a farmer to get reserve drugs, reserve antibiotics for their own use, which is something that we need to discourage, so that farmers would then go through a proper process of having a veterinarian look at the animals, identifying the problem, and then treating with the appropriate antibiotic. That way, then we are able to manage the antibiotics that we have and prevent ourselves from getting in a situation where we will have no antibiotics to use. We also need to commit ourselves to national surveillance and public reporting of antibiotic use. And the interesting thing, when we started looking at antibiotic use across Africa, where we are, it was very challenging to actually determine how much antibiotics are used. In the Kenyan context, we were the only published piece of work was done by a professor of mine called Professor Mitema in 2011. So between 2011 and now, it has been very difficult to determine what antibiotics, where are they going for, and what are they being used for. I think that's part of the surveillance system, just to look at where the antibiotics are going, but also beyond that, to ensure that the antibiotics are being used in a prudent way, and also to ensure that we are clear what they're being used to treat, and also to know which organisms are beginning to develop resistance to some of those antibiotics. We are currently doing a study with the help of the Directorate of Veterinary Services in this country, and we are looking at what goes through the regional investigative laboratories, and very interesting results of what is being isolated from what farmers are presenting to the regional veterinary investigation laboratories. Again, some data that we shall be discussing and releasing later in the year. So in a nutshell, that's what we are looking at, that antibiotics have become important and critical, but they should not be used to prop up a poor welfare production system that is ultimately going to have negative impact on human health and human livelihood. And it's also important to recognize that that use of antibiotics is not sustainable. And we then need to shift to a sustainable process where we're looking at high welfare production systems that meet certain standards that are able to ensure that the welfare of the animal is catered for. I think that would be the end of my presentation, and over back to Beth for question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor, for that very exciting and well-detailed presentation. There's been a lot of questions streaming in from the participants in this meeting, and we'll just endeavor to bundle them up and answer them in sets, because you're all having the same concerns. Now, the first question, Victor, is what are superbugs? And when we talk about the rise of superbugs, what's the percentage of fatalities caused by superbugs globally?
All right, superbugs are essentially antibiotic-resistant organisms, which is to say, because of exposure to antibiotics, certain organisms started to develop resistant traits or resistant genes, which then make the antibiotic not work. So essentially what you're saying is that you have an organism, and I'll use an easy one, as E. coli, which is a bacteria, as I explained earlier on, in the gut. Because of either misuse of drugs or giving drugs at low doses, what ultimately happens is that that organism gets exposed to the drug, and over a long period of time either develops traits or genes that then protect it against the antibiotic. The second question was what percentage of fatalities we are seeing. Globally, right now, we are losing about 700,000 people every year because they have been infected by organisms that are resistant to known drugs, which means then the disease cannot be treated. And it's estimated that if we do not intervene and do something about it, by 2050, we'll be losing 10 million people annually, because they have been affected by organisms that are resistant to drugs, and there's no drug known. I think in the slide that we were talking about, the one we were talking about, the pork testing, where we were showing that in the US, there were, in 9 out of 16 cases, the organism was resistant to more than 3 drugs. What we call multi-drug resistance is something that we're beginning to even see in the African context. And it's something that is giving us challenges because even a combination of drugs cannot treat. Hence the reason why we are saying, let's go back to the farming system, which is part of contributing to the problem, and starting to manage that at the farming level. If you use less antibiotics at the farm, it means that there will be less resistant organism in the environment, which then means that we are able to manage the process around superbugs more efficiently. But if we are continue on the path we are in, it simply means by 2050 or 15 years down the line, we might not have any more drugs to treat the infections that are coming through humans. I hope that answers the question, Beth.
I believe so. All right, so we'll move to the next set. Someone is asking, Kenya is in the process of enacting an animal welfare protection bill. Is World Animal Protection contributing to this process? If so, what will this bill mean for farm animal systems? The other question is, what is being done or what needs to be done to ensure improved animal welfare standards in smallholder farms? Because a lot of smallholder farmers are unaware of the best animal welfare practices. The third question is, we are seeing more farmers inclining towards caged farming of, for example, poultry. So how does this shift affect animal welfare, and what can be done to empower farmers and move them away from this kind of intensive farming? Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, for those three good questions. The first one, we as World Animal Protection have actually contributed immensely in the development of the Animal Welfare and Protection Bill. We were part of the initial stakeholders who went through drafting the bill and then went through the process of stakeholding. In my understanding, I believe the bill has now reached cabinet or is in the process of getting to cabinet before it can go to parliament for debate. And it's one of the 4 bills that the Directorate of Veterinary Services is driving to then try to ensure that we are able to manage veterinary services, aspects of veterinary services, which animal welfare is one of. How will it then impact on farm animals? I think so far what has happened is that this country has had one piece of legislation, the Protection of Cruelty to Animals Act, CAP 360, which was enacted way back in 1965, but has had several amendments to date. What it's going to do is the new bill is going to, one, enable matters around farm animal welfare to be ingrained in the legislation. Things around what I was talking about, responsible minimum standards that we need to be looking at. The bill will then anchor that into law, making it a requirement to ensure that welfare of the animals are dealt with. The second thing that the bill has tried to do, which is the Protection to Cruelty Act has not done very well, is to then move animal welfare to the counties. Remember that the older piece of legislation was done when we had only one government. We are now looking at 48 governments. So part of it is then to ensure that counties have county welfare, animal welfare boards or councils that then can manage animal welfare issues at county levels, which then means we are driving animal welfare to mashinani, to the ground, where the real action is, where the real, where we need to be to ensure that welfare of the animals are catered for. So I think that's something that is positive and something that we are looking at. It's also good to point out that it's not only a Kenyan process. Legislation has started coming around animal welfare. 2 or 3 years back, we launched the African Animal Welfare Strategy, and AU-IBA and African Union, and that is being cascaded and taken down to the various countries, to the regional economic communities, and ultimately to individual countries. I know yesterday or somewhere, a day or so back, I saw somebody, an advert, looking for somebody to do animal welfare strategy and policy for Uganda and South Sudan. So that's part of what is happening. The legislative agenda is being driven across the continent, and I think as World Animal Protection, we've contributed to that. We have been part of the African Platform on Animal Welfare, which has been driving animal welfare legislation and policies across the continent. So we have made our contribution and we'll continue contributing as we go forward. The second one was a very interesting question. How do we then improve animal welfare in smallholder farms? I think that is something that we're looking at critically, especially as we move into food systems, because 70 to 80% of our food actually comes from smallholder farms. And when I make this presentation about factory farms, I also take cognizance of the fact that maybe Africa is not there. Our challenge then is how do we then ensure that we are not going to where Europe and the rest of the world is coming from. When you look at big factory farms where we have massive animals in barns, the stocking density is all wrong. Europe is trying to move back and saying that maybe 42 kilos per meter squared is not where we need to be. They're starting to look at legislation that's talking about 30 kilos per meter squared for chickens as stocking density. While Africa is trying to say, let's move to where Europe is, because we are having that assumption that the more we are able to push animals into certain spaces, the better and the faster the returns is. But clearly that is not what science is showing, and that's not what is coming back. So I think part of what we need to do in terms of smallholder farms is education and raising awareness that some of what they're doing, it would be impacting negatively on animal welfare, but also connecting that to the ultimate product and the impact on consumers. Because once consumers start demanding certain things, farmers would then have to shift. It also behoves that we work with big industry players. In this country, we have big players around in the poultry industry, in the pig industry, whom we have engaged. And not only in this country, even in the neighboring countries, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Zambia, where we are working, we have engaged them because as they drive that process, they're the same people who provide day-old chicks to the farmers. They're the same people who are providing feeds to the farmers. If they're able to then drive the animal welfare fundamentals around their extension services that they offer, then the small-scale farmer is able to learn and to improve and to get to the next level. I think also we need to realize that the other thing that is going to drive animal welfare standards is the international practice. Realize that we are in a global setting, and in this global setting, big players with footprint across the world are beginning to have certain requirements. And those requirements and commitments being made elsewhere have an impact on the business where we are. For instance, as we have looked at supermarkets and worked with retailers in this country, it is becoming very clear that requirements of animal welfare is a fundamental thing that is being looked at. If you talk to the big producers in this country or regionally in Eastern Africa, they will tell you that the audits that they go through that are looking at food safety, that are looking at welfare standards, that are beginning to look at antibiotic use. If we are not able to fulfill these audits, then we are most likely going to lose markets to the big boys out there. So it's all of us, government, industry, corporates, retailers, whatever level, consumers, to start asking and demanding for certain standards. And I think we as consumers, if we start asking ourselves, where is our food coming from, and making buying decisions based on that, we are then able to drive the animal welfare standards agenda, especially around whichever farming system that they will be coming from. The last question is very interesting and is something that we are looking at as an organization, being a global organization. When you talk about the move towards cage, and you can see what is happening, Europe and the developed world has banned production of cage systems. In fact, if you look at literature, we are looking at commitments that are talking about not procuring eggs from cage production system from as early as 2024. The question we need to ask ourselves in the African context, this rejected innovation is being brought to Africa. Is it a marketing gimmick that then makes our production system not to conform to certain standards? And remember, the same people who are saying that we will not be accepting eggs from battery cage systems are also having big market share in the localities we are in. If you get out of where we are right now and move maybe a kilometer away, you'll find fast food restaurants that have made such commitments. You'll find retailers or supermarkets that have made those commitments. Question is, why are they bringing it here? And the more interesting one, which we are looking at as World Animal Protection, who's funding it? And it's very interesting to discover that some of the funds that are driving that process are actually coming from markets where they have banned use of those products or use of those innovations like cage system. And I think it's for us as a country or as a continent to come together and ask ourselves what works. Research has also shown that using animals in cage system, because of the stress that the animal has, the space is not enough, the animal is not able to express its natural behavior, leads to poor production and leads to injuries to the animal, which impacts negatively on productivity. So the question we need to ask ourselves as animal welfare people, is it that we are selling our farmers an innovation that is actually not producing optimally? And with those answers, then we would be able to drive the process of ensuring that some of these things are then rejected. Thank you, Beth. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, all right, Victor. So we are now answering the few last questions. And one of them is, the global population is increasing every day. And there are all these welfare concerns in intensive farming systems. Really, how will we manage to feed the world without compromising animal welfare? How is that future ideally supposed to look like? There are also some follow-up questions. For example, cages have been rejected in the European market, but they still find a way in the Africa market. Some of these laws that are being put in place at the African region and even in countries like Kenya, are they going to be protecting animals from this type of intensive farming? The other question is, with increasing development, there's a decline in land space, and this could be the reason why smallholder farmers are being pushed into cage systems. What are the alternatives that can be offered to them moving forward? And then the final question is, how can the youth and any other person participate in putting an end to this cruelty on farm animals going about in the African region? What really, as an individual, can someone contribute to ensure that animals are treated better? And those are our last questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. Another set of very good but challenging questions. I will try to address as much as I can. But as we said earlier on, if the questions are not adequately addressed, we commit ourselves to responding to emails. You can send them on email, and we will send you an answer after consulting other players in the industry, because some of them are beyond Dr. Yamo's remit. But I'll try. In terms of cages starting from the top, global population increasing, I think that's one of the things that as an organization we're beginning to look at. And in the Kenyan context, it even becomes more interesting. Let me not say Kenyan, in the African context, it even becomes more interesting because of urbanization. If you look at urbanization, urbanization has literally taken away spaces that we used for farming. If I give you a good example, in the county next to where I'm sitting, we used to have a lot of poultry farmers when I worked for industry. 2 or 3 years back, when we went to do a survey on their understanding of animal welfare and what they were looking at, a good percentage of the farmers quickly told us that small-scale farming does not make sense anymore. They would rather convert that space that they used to have their chicken house into a flat, because it's an easy business. There's enough people coming into the urban center, they will get clients, and the risk of losing chickens is no longer there. So I think it's some of those things that we as a continent need to start addressing. I've seen spaces where we have converted arable land into buildings. And that is a concern for some of us. Where then will we be growing our foods coming from? And I think those are things and the discussions that as an organization is what has led us to start looking at food systems, because we are now beginning to look at it holistically. What is happening? What is driving it? What are the drivers? What are the primary issues that we need to address? Because that is what is getting us out of focus. And I agree with the person who's asked that question. How then will we feed ourselves if we are converting arable land, if the land is becoming smaller and smaller and there's not enough space? And that is why, if you heard what I said, we need to start having a balance between factory with the farming that we're doing and ensuring that it doesn't become the factory farms that we are talking about. And how then do we drive that process so that we cater for that animal? The reality is that when the animal is catered for, the production is better. The food, the quality of the product that is coming out is better. So I think there's a misconception out there that we need to produce more. What we're saying is that we need to produce better quality products, and that can only be done if the animal is catered for. Remember the 5 fundamentals, if all their needs or the fundamental freedoms are met, and that then drives the process going forward. I also alluded to the fact that we're also saying maybe it's time for us globally to look at the amount of meat that is going into our animal products that is going into our food basket. Yeah, because that is the other challenge. We are clearing forests to grow maize that goes into feeding animals that then feed us. Maybe it's time for us to use that opportunity to look at plant-based alternatives. And I know in the developed world, there are people who are looking at plant-based alternatives. There are people who are beginning to now look at developing what we call clean meats, producing meat in a lab. And those are things that we need to start grappling with and saying, where do we need to go from here and how do we cater for this? But in a nutshell, what I'd say, the balance between the growing population, the available land, and the capacity for animals to produce is something that we must strike. And it doesn't mean that the animal then is disadvantaged. In fact, the more animals are disadvantaged, the less production that they produce, the production that comes through, and the less we are able to we are able to feed ourselves. I thought I had talked about cages, and as I said, as they are rejected, and you realize that they are rejected because there are certain laws. Europe now, for instance, has a law that says that you cannot keep animals in certain cage systems. But Africa doesn't have those laws, and that's where I agree with the person who's asked that question, that it is important for us to also look at laws that drive some of these processes. We should not become the dumping ground. Yeah, and as I said, it's interesting to look at it because some of the cages are coming with funding. And I worked in a bank where we were funding people to go into battery cage systems. But is that funding also catering for the welfare of the animal? And that's one of the things that as an organization we're beginning to look at. What are the sources of funding? Who is then driving that fund? And is that funding then be able to cater for the animals? Because if the animal is not catered for, we end up with a system that is broken and a system that gives us problems at our health at certain levels. There's also increasing development, which I think is linked to urbanization that is taking away spaces. And that's what I think somebody said, it's what is pushing smallholders into the alternative systems. What I am beginning to think, and I think it's another discussion we need to have, is how long can we sustain the smallholder production system? Is it a sustainable production system? Is it something that we need to retweak around, maybe bring the farmers together and have a bigger farming system that then makes sense? Because remember, in production systems, it's about volume. It's a volume business. The more animals you have, and the more and the better you manage them, and the better the inputs that go into them, the better the productivity. And that's the connection between animal welfare and production. It's not about the size of the farm, it's about how you then treat the animals that you're having. And if the space is just not enough, then maybe because of economics of diminishing returns, maybe we then need to look at alternative ways of managing. How does the youth and the general public participate? I think the first thing is know where your food is coming from. Yeah, because I think a lot of what is being driven in the farming, in the food system, is driven on the understanding that we are not aware of what we are eating, we are not aware of how it's produced, and we are not able to then intervene and say no to certain things. Again, as I said, in a subsequent webinar, we'll be talking about what the consumers are actually saying. We've just done a global poll across all the 14 countries that we are in, the 14 offices that we are in, Kenya included. And it's very interesting to see what people are beginning to ask. People are beginning to connect animal welfare to the health of, to the quality of product that comes onto their table, which then ultimately leads to their well-being as humans. So I think for youth, one is just know where your products, what you're consuming is coming from. Then two, make certain decisions, be part of the process. As an organization, we are looking for volunteers. We are looking for people who can be part of the movement, that can go out and engage government and say this is wrong and we need to change it, that can engage retailers and ask for certain minimum standards to be adopted, can engage producers to ensure that producers are doing the right thing. And that is something that you can do for us. And I'm sure Beth, who is asking questions, will give you the links to our social media and how you can become part of the volunteer movement that we're trying to develop across Africa, that will drive and change the narrative in our food system, because it's all about you and me taking an action. For those of us who are consumers and general public, make an informed buying decision by knowing where your products are coming from, and then making the buying decision. Because as we said, factory farming is about costs. They look at the bottom line. So if the bottom line is affected because we are making better buying decisions, because we are informed, then the factory, the producers or the food system will be forced to shift into what we are looking at and making commitments around certain things. When you go to your retailer, ask your retailer whether they do certain things. Interestingly, a year or so back, one of the big supermarkets in this country was running a poll. And one of the questions we kept asking our friends and colleagues to do is, when you finish the poll, ask them whether they're catering for animal welfare. And I think if you look at that, the specific retailer, these days they talk about producing products are produced locally, they support local farmers, but we need to ask and interrogate further and ask them to make certain commitments to ensure that in their value chain, no animal welfare, poor welfare will not be accommodated. Thank you very much. Over to you, Beth.
Thank you so much, Victor, for comprehensively answering those questions. If your question has not been answered in this session, in this live session, we'll endeavor to do so. And if you still have any questions, kindly write to the email that you registered for this webinar. Otherwise, thank you all so much for attending. For now, we'll have a journalist session immediately after this. So if you're a journalist, kindly consider sticking around. But before we leave, we'll do a final poll just to gauge how this experience was for you. There's always something to improve for the next, and we'd like to hear that from you. So kindly participate in this last poll. Once you're done, you're free to leave the meeting. And if you're a journalist, stick around so that we can do your session, your audio session, so that you're able to get answers to your media stories. Thank you. We are now live in the journalist session. Yes, we are now live in the journalist session. If you'd like to ask a question, kindly raise your hand, and then I will unmute you, and you can go ahead to ask Victor any media-related questions. Thank you. We'll start with Dr. Asoka. Kindly tell us where you're coming from and which media house you're representing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not from any media house. I was just part of the webinar, and I want to thank you very much and wish to leave. I'm not part of the media.
No worries. Do you have any question you'd like to ask?
I already did. Although I had technical issues, I didn't get the answer, but I think I found it in progress by Victor on the issue of the animal welfare and protection bill.
Oh, okay. Yes, that was answered. But don't worry.
I didn't really get the answer, but I caught up with it somehow about the regional.
Yes, so this webinar has been recorded and will be available on our Facebook page and YouTube page, which are both World Animal Protection Africa. So that's another place where you can get a comprehensive answer for the question that you asked. But thank you so much. All right, we'll move on to Moturi. Kindly tell us where you're joining us from, which media house you're representing, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Victor Moturi. I'm a producer and maybe CEO at Topaz Communication as an agency, communication agency. Also a freelance journalist Pamoja FM and also KUTV. So now I've been doing animal welfare reporting for quite some time now. And also last month I managed to visit Kisii, where we did caging stories, and the farmers were saying that the main reason why they are doing those cages is because there's no enough land. There's a lack of land there, and also maybe they protect the chicken to enter into neighbors' farms, maybe which might lead to animal-human conflict. Now, which advice can we give such farmers regarding animal protection and welfare in those regions where there's no land, enough land, maybe for free range? Thank you.
All right, Moturi, we'll go ahead and take a question from Nelson. Kawawa, please tell us where you're joining us from and which media house you're representing.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my question actually is this. I just want to know, okay, I'm calling from Radio City in the Rural Media Services. And actually I want to know what actually you people from animal welfare protection you are doing to engage with farmers, who I think actually is actually the target audience here. So do like an outreach program to talk to them and create the awareness.
All right, thank you for that, Nelson. We'll take the final one from Henix Obuchunju. I hope I am saying your name right. Kindly tell us where you're joining us from and go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Henix. I'm a journalist working with Pamoja FM, the voice of Kibra. And so I'm just curious. I've been seeing some farmers using antibiotics meant for human beings like Panadol, Septrin, and using them to treat homa ya kuku, such like things. What are the dangers in that?
All right, thank you, Henix. So those are the questions we've received for now. Maybe we can take a final one from Bernard or Nyango. Please tell us where you're calling us from and go ahead and ask your question, and also tell us which media house you're representing.
Yes, my name is Bernard. I'm from Chuka University. So I would like to know, maybe for your program, how are you ensuring that maybe those people or guys in remote areas are getting educated concerning your program? Because maybe most of the people who are able to listen to you are in the urban areas and those who use technology. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, Dr. Victor, I believe we can answer those ones first, and should any others come up, we'll answer them in the next set. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you for those who have asked questions. I will try and address all of them. I will start from Bernard, who's asking how we are ensuring people in the remote area are getting the program. I think there are 2 or 3 levels of things that we do. One, we work with partners. And one of our big partners are associations like the Veterinary Association, the animal production people. We also work with local radio stations. I know once in a while I've been in some village out at Pwani or in Western talking or in vernacular stations. So the idea is that we as an organization are big on advocacy, and we take any space that's available, and we are willing to engage and talk to anybody at any level. So our big ones are actually through media engagements. We talk to media people like you. We also get spaces to do local radio programs. We also go to, before COVID happened, we were also going to exhibitions, to farmer exhibitions, to commercial exhibitions, to agricultural shows, just to get the message there. But ultimately, it is you and I who are going to drive her. And remember, I talked about a volunteer. We are trying to build a volunteer movement that can then take the message to the relevant levels, not only the farming message, but the animal welfare message across all animals. So if you're interested and want to be part of it, and that's why we also do webinars, so that we get people who are interested and we can work with at any level. In terms of HENIX, antibiotics, let me put it this way. We normally talk about, we make it look like the antibiotics for chickens and the one for humans are different. The correct position is that the active ingredient in those antibiotics are the same. So when you're talking about a tetracycline or ampicillin, it's the same active compound. It's only that the carrier that is used for animals might be slightly different from the carrier that is being used for humans. So that's one thing that we need to be very aware of. And that's one of the reasons why antibiotic resistance is becoming a big thing. Because whatever we're using at farming, at the farm level, is not any different from the dawa that you will get when you fall sick. And so if you're already consuming that active compound through milk or through meat or through any product, eggs, it means that by the time you get sick, the organisms that are causing that disease might have been exposed to low levels of that antibiotic. And that is what is worrying, is what is causing the global worry at this point in time, that because of misuse of drugs, and one classical one is what you've said, people then giving antibiotics that are human preparation to animals. The fact is that that animal then has been exposed to that dawa, and whatever the product the farmer is getting from it will have residues or resistant organisms from that exposure. And that's why it is very important to do one of the rallying calls we are saying, do not just treat animals. Do not wake up in the morning and because your animal is looking sick, you decide to give it Panadol or you decide to give it Septrin or whatever. Get technical advice from people who know, the veterinary surgeons or the vet practitioners around you, so that you're treating the correct disease. And having worked in industry for many years, one of the most concerning things we noticed was a farmer has chickens are diarrheaing in the morning. They ask the neighbor, your chickens were diarrheaing the other day. What did you use? And their neighbor gives them whatever they used. Half the time, or 90, 80, 70% of the time, that product might not work because the cause of that diarrhea might not be the same as what was being treated by your neighbor. And that's why it's critical for us to then engage the appropriate technical people to get the right dawas. And that's why we're also saying, the accessibility of drugs like antibiotics. Antibiotics are actually prescription-only medicine. They should not be just bought over the counter. And that's something that as we are telling government, it's something that the regulator needs to tighten so that you cannot just walk into a supermarket or into an agrovet shop and get those dawas.
Thank you all for attending this webinar. We hope to see you in the next. Goodbye for now.